So, I hope we have a chance to go to Mass today, to pray for those who have died. And it's kind of interesting, I had to point out to young Father John, our assistant, that there's 3 different Mass settings for today. Because years ago, there was only one day a year that priests could say 3 Masses. And it was for all souls. And so it used to be that you said first Mass for all the souls who passed away in your parish, and then those who passed away, like relatives and friends, and then the souls in the entire church that passed away. So a priest could say 3 Masses, and years ago, collect 3 stipends. But if he was with the pastor, all 3 went to the pastor. I never had that experience. Because that was changed over 40 years ago. Okay. But I had to explain to Father John why there are 3 sets of scripture readings for today. And maybe some of you remember, you were told that, you go to Mass and say 3 or 5 Our Fathers and Hail Marys and Glory Bees for those who have passed away, that maybe the Lord would have judgment and have someone in purgatory and come through the gates of heaven. And then you'll go outside of the church and then come back in and then you do it. How many of you remember that? Yeah, you should. Same nothing told me, told you. And it just so happens today is what? It's the first Friday, right? So most of our churches will have adoration, exposition and adoration, because it's the first Friday, and many people going out from our parishes to visit the homebound and bring the Eucharist to them. So it's a day to continue. I understand that in the Philippines and some Mexican countries or Hispanic-speaking people, they have a tradition where they go to the cemeteries and have a picnic. Some will camp out in the cemeteries. Of course, they don't live in northeastern Wisconsin, but that they have a celebration. Did they do it in your country?
It's a holiday.
It's a holiday?
And everybody goes to the cemetery, bring flowers, fresh flowers, and after that, as a family, go out
go out
restaurants
but bring fresh flowers to the graves in Peru.
That's yesterday. Yes, they did that yesterday. Yes.
Okay, so different traditions, huh? Thomas, yeah?
What if anybody, I know you know, don't say, anybody knows what parish in the Fox Valley was the first to have special adoration and who established it?
Okay, so Tom asked the question, does anyone here know what's the first parish here in Appleton to have perpetual adoration?
And who established it?
And who established it? No? No?
Right. Yeah.
Sacred Heart Parish, Father Stoudemire.
Yeah.
First established. I think Monsignor Schmidt actually, yeah. Emil Schmidt, before Stoudemire. So, all right. Hey, we're looking in the Gospel of Mark, the marvelous miracles of Mark, right? Yeah, and we finished up last Friday with Jesus and his disciples feeding a vast crowd, right? Because Jesus was moved when he saw them coming from all different directions. Because they were like sheep without a shepherd, and he began to teach them many things. So he asked his apostles, "What do you have? You got any food?" "Yeah. Couple of buns and some dried fish." "Okay, bring them here." Have everyone sit down, right? He blessed them, broke them, and asked his disciples to distribute them. And everyone fed. Over 5,000 were fed that day. Multiplication of loaves and fishes. I said last week that was one of the few miracles that you find in all four Gospels. And basically, in all four versions, it's like the same. But I also pointed out, asked you to stop and think. Jesus asking his apostles to help distribute, that's kind of like what we have in our parishes today. Those of you who are extraordinary ministers of communion, you're doing what the apostles were asked to do by Jesus, helping to give out food. Only not just buns and dried fish, but bread of life, huh? So, but that formula, Jesus took, blessed, broke, and distributed and fed people. That formula you find all over. So this occasion and another, there's another occasion coming up of multiplication in Mark, marvelous miracle. He's going to use the same format, and we find that same format at the Last Supper, right? So the thing is, a lot of times people just focus on the Last Supper, and this is a unique thing that Jesus did. It was unique because then of the words he said, but there was a pattern established before in the Gospels. One of the marvelous miracles across all four Gospels, right? Where he does the same thing. And he probably, I said, probably used the blessing on food, bread that the Jews use yet today. Blessed are you, Lord, our God, ruler of the universe, who brings forth bread from the earth. Okay? And they have a blessing for other food too. So, we look at chapter 6, verse 30 to 56 this morning. So after all the excitement feeding 5,000 people, with his disciples' help, Jesus, curiously, from 45, then he made his disciples get into a boat and proceeded to the other side toward Bethsaida while he dismissed the crowd. And so that's kind of a curious thing. It's kind of a mystery. Why did he tell them, go ahead, in the boat? The story ends also feeding them without the wonder that's customarily connected. People, usually after a miracle, people are filled with wonder and awe, and so on. That we don't find that as Mark presents it here. And there's a commentary. One commentary suggests that Mark regards this incident as a messianic sign, bearing the mystery of Christ's person. And in the second multiplication story, we will look at chapter 8. The disciples still didn't understand. Now, the next section, then, starting from 45, as he's dismissing the crowd, verse 46, and when he had taken leave of them, he went off to the mountain to pray. When it was evening, the boat was far out on the sea, and he was alone on the shore. And then he saw that they were tossed about while rowing, for the wind was against them. And about the fourth watch of the night, he came toward them, walking on the sea, and he meant to pass them by. But when they saw him walking on the sea, they thought it was a ghost, and they cried out. And they had all seen him and were terrified. But at once he spoke to them, "Take courage, it is I. Do not be afraid." So, in looking at this, well, first of all, I want to point out a little geography to you. So if you have maps in the back of your Bible, take a look and see if you have a map of at the New Testament time or first century. So I don't know if they have them. So most of the Jesus ministry, of course, we've been looking at happens around the north end of the Sea of Galilee. He did a little trip down here to Gadara, but otherwise it was right around this area. Now, it said the multiplication of the loaves and fishes at Gerizim, sitting not far from Capernaum, which is where Peter and Andrew, James and John, and Uncle Zebedee had their fishing business, huh? The Gerizim is not far away, just a couple miles, if that. All right. So, but what I want to point out to you, take a look at the north end of the Sea of Galilee. Coming in from the north is actually the Jordan River. The Jordan River basically passes, as they saw it, right through the Sea of Galilee, comes out the south end, goes down to the Dead Sea. Okay? So, if it's over here, where the multiplication of the loaves and fishes, and the hill country starts going up here, that's why they have it. He asked them to go to Bethsaida. Bethsaida was on the east side of the Jordan River. Gerizim was on the west side of the Jordan River. And usually the quickest way to get there was jump in a boat and row across. Although it's not really all that far to walk either, especially when those people are used to walking. But here's the other thing I want to point out. Bethsaida, and it has Bethsaida-Julius here. Now, at the time of Jesus, Bethsaida, earlier in the gospel it says Peter and Andrew and Philip came from Bethsaida. Philip, that's not a Jewish name, that's a Greco-Roman name. Philip. You know, Alexander the Great's father was King Philip of Macedonia, right? Okay? If you remember from your history. So, Philip was a Greek name. That area east of the Jordan River was more Gentile, Greek-speaking Gentile territory. So, the implication here is after Jesus, if you interpret the multiplication of the loaves and fishes as a sign, a messianic sign of the mystery of Jesus' power and so on. And now he tells the apostles, go to the other side, where the more there's Jewish people there, obviously, but also Greek-speaking Gentile people, that the mission is going to move to the other side, also extended to the Greek-speaking Gentile people. Okay, so who did Mark write his gospel for? About 30 years later, mostly Gentile, baptized Christian, Greek speaking, okay? So this is a hint early in Mark that the desire of Jesus is to extend the great blessing, the abundance of grace and blessing that's indicated, interpreted by the multiplication of the loaves and fishes, that's being extended now also, not just to the Jewish population, but also to the Greek-speaking, Gentile, baptized people of Mark's audience that Mark is writing this to. Okay, Jesus walking on the water. I know there's all kinds of jokes about that and so on, and most of them are pretty silly. But it says it happened in the fourth watch of the night. Okay, on the clock, what's the fourth watch of the night? Morning. Between what hours and what hours?
Well, it starts about 3 a.m., doesn't it?
Starts at 3 a.m. You're right, Gary. Basically between 3 and 6. Okay? And so, and they thought they were seeing a ghost, and so they cried out, and they were terrified. Folks, what we have here, I'm going to put it up under report for our friends from YouTube. So Jesus walking on the water, almost near dawn, okay? The fourth hour of the watch, basically between 3 and 6 a.m., we would call it a.m., fourth hour of the watch. That's as the Romans calculated. What we have here, folks, is an epiphany. Now, we have become so used to identifying Epiphany with Jesus' birth, right? And the coming of the 3 wise men, right? And so on. But there were other epiphanies. Epiphany means a manifestation of God or God's divine power amongst people. This can be interpreted as one of them. Why? Because we find that walking on the water was only a divine function. What? Where did you get that from? Book of Exodus, 1 Kings, Job. If you have footnotes in your Bible, you look under the cross references, and it'll probably lead you to those cross references, okay? Exodus chapter 33, verses 19 and 22. And Job 9, chapter 9, verse 8, and chapter 38 and verse 16, walking on the water. The Lord, divine function of the creative power of God moving over the waters. And so this becomes an epiphany. And of course, the apostles, they didn't realize it, huh? This is a revelation of the mystery in a natural setting. What do you mean a natural setting? Well, stop to think of it. The disciples, most of them were, by occupation, they were what?
Fishermen.
When did they go fishing?
Early in the morning.
All the time. Mostly at night. They put their nets out at night. Over and over again. When Jesus called, Peter and Andrew and James and John, it was already morning. They were washing their nets, right? And other occasions as well. Jesus says, put out into the deep, right? Okay, they weren't sport fishermen. Okay, they were commercial fishermen. They put their nets out and stayed out probably all night and then pulled their nets in. Why? Because they had to get the fish to market. They had to clean the fish, get it to market. I mean, they were out, they were they had the whole process it. They had to do the whole business, right? So they were used to fishing at night. Here, they're not making headway. They're rowing. It says they were rowing, going from west to east. So they think there's a ghost coming towards them. An unexpected experience. And it said Jesus was walking along the shoreline, and then all of a sudden came across the water. And so it frightened him. And what he says when he perceives that is, do not be afraid, it is I. In Greek, ego e ami. It is I. It is I. Which is really close to I am. In the Old Testament, I am was the name that was given to Moses when Moses said, who should I say is appearing to me? And it's I am. Yahweh, I am who am. Okay? And we find that in the Gospel of John in the I am sayings. So there's a very strong epiphany motif going on here, with roots, and in the Old Testament over and over again. And Jesus, as soon as he gets in the boat, the winds cease. Now, where there's wind, dangerous wind, over and over in the Bible, there's a sense of chaos. Okay? Book of Genesis, right from the beginning. Okay? The waters were in turmoil, it says. And then God breathed on the waters and they calmed down. All right? So the wind is a sign of chaos and destruction and possible death. But it can also be the sign of God coming to them. And there's all types of the interaction like that in the Old Testament. So here Jesus makes himself known to them in a special way. That the thing, it's kind of a funny thing. Let's look at that. They think they see a ghost. Verse 50. They had all seen him and were terrified. And he spoke, take courage, it is I. Do not be afraid. And he got into the boat with them, and the wind died down. So that's an indication of that he was master of the elements. Now before, it was a storm with the boat being thrashed about, right? And he spoke to the wind and calmed it down. Here, it's a little bit different. He got into the boat, and of course, fast forward, in the latter part of the first century, the fishing boat was a sign of the church. Okay? In catacomb drawings, iconography of the early church. Bark of Peter, it was called. And then subsequently in artwork, okay, the bark of Peter, fishing boat. So he gets in, it's a meaning that he's gonna be with them and calm down any crises that you find. So, this is an epiphany motif. And still, there's a curious thing that you got into the boat, verse 51, with them, the wind died down, and they were completely astounded, but they had not understood the incident of the loaves. On the contrary, their hearts were hardened. Now, that's really a curious editorial comment. Their hearts were hardened. And we need to break that down a little bit.
Their minds are closed.
Their minds were closed. Is that what you had? Yeah. You have King James version. What was that last verse? Verse 52. King James version. We got someone here with King James version. Well, you need a big grown-up Bible. They answered too in the King James version. Their heart was hardened, okay, because they didn't consider the miracle of the loaves. What do you have?
I'm curious about verse 48 where it says, walking on the water, meant to pass by.
Oh, you meant to pass by them.
Yeah.
Oh, I'm glad you asked that. I'm glad you brought that up.
Like their hearts are hardened.
Well, no, that business about their hearts being hardened, that comes at the end. He meant to pass them by. Okay? That also is a phrase, a motif that we find in other places as well. Okay? So, the two disciples on the way to Emmaus after the resurrection, on Resurrection Day, they're walking from Jerusalem after experiencing everything in the story. And Jesus came walking up to them and meant to pass by. And then they invited him to eat with them. And along the way, he explained everything to them, right? Okay, it has that same connotation. And there's Old Testament indicators as well, where they use that phrase, meant to pass, you meant to pass them by. So, it's an indication that here's an opportunity, it's an epiphany, here's an opportunity to recognize the true identity of Jesus. And yet they didn't see it, even though they had experienced and actually physically helped him distribute the food and everything. And here walking on the water, they were so astounded, their hearts could not work. That doesn't mean they had hardening of the arteries. Okay? Their hearts were hardened means that they didn't understand. Okay, and they didn't understand his true identity. All right? So, I'm gonna touch on something else too for you. This is a kind of an extended commentary. Actually, Deacon Maury, when you had the preaching class as preparing for deacon, and it gave you an exegetical methodology, this is called the broader hermeneutical development. Okay.
I wish I said that.
Yeah, the broader hermeneutical development. Okay. And that means after looking at it, how does it apply and so on. What's this? So here's a kind of a extended commentary or a broader hermeneutical development on this. After back-to-back miracles, and basically you call them nature miracles, okay? Remember the categories? Nature miracles. The multiplication of the loaves, right? and Jesus walking on the water, that should seem to be enough to convince anyone of Jesus' own identity, right? That he was God with them in incarnate form. And yet, their hearts were hardened. It seems he is looking for something more from them and us. He's looking for something more. Mark, the gospel writer, okay, the evangelist, addressing this to his community. I'm going to give you 3 examples of hopes that he might have when his audience and us, when we hear that. Number 1, he hopes that they will question their own degree of intimacy with Jesus, of the risen Jesus. To question the degree of intimacy with the risen Jesus. Otherwise, he's going to pass them by. Jeff. Otherwise, he'll pass them by. In their own wind-tossed world, wouldn't the words of Jesus, and even when we face crisis and so on, would the words of Jesus give us comfort? Do not be afraid. Do not be afraid. The theme of John Paul II, some of his first preachings, especially to those under the communist Iron Curtain, do not be afraid, right? Here's where it comes from. Mark also hopes, number 2, that his readers will come to understand the meaning of all the events, in Jesus' life, including his passion, death on the cross. Some commentators, indicate just about any story, and particularly miracle story, in the Gospel of Mark, all point towards the cross. And eventually, the cross, after the cross comes the risen Jesus in new life. Right? Third, Mark hopes that their fears will be resolved through the Eucharist, looking at the multiplication of the loaves and fishes, that they come to understand their own suffering in light of Jesus' sacrifice for all his people and us. So these are three broader dimensions, if you will, or commentaries, looking what is Mark the evangelist, what does he hope by putting these 2 stories together, right? So these are the 3 hopes, that his readers and us have a greater degree of intimacy with Jesus, and we must not be afraid, that to understand the meaning of all the events between Jesus and his disciples point towards the passion, death, and resurrection of Jesus. That's number 2. Number 3, his hope that any fears that we have may be resolved in and through the Eucharist. And Jesus' own suffering, his sacrifice on the cross, it was for all people and will not fail us. And that's why, he has that little expression in this story that he got into the boat. He got into the boat, the bark of Peter, and so on. So that's a little extended commentary. Broader hermeneutical dimension, as we were taught. Okay, the next section, then he has a little summary. And this is a typical Markian summary, starting from verse 53. After making the crossing, they came to land at Gennesaret and tied up there. And as they were leaving the boat, people immediately recognized him. And they scurried about the surrounding country. They began to bring in the sick on mats and to wherever they heard he was. And whatever village or towns or countryside he entered, they laid the sick in the marketplaces and begged him that they might only touch the tassel of his cloak. As many as touched it were healed. So, And as this chapter 6 concludes, it says, now they're back again in Gennesaret. Near that spot, when he multiplied the loaves and fishes. Okay? It doesn't say if they ever reached Bethsaida. Okay? I don't know if the winds, if they saw Jesus walking like a ghost and stopped rowing, so the boat turned around by itself in the wind, and it just drifted back. Okay, we don't understand it, right? But basically, he goes back to that same region or territory, and you'd have to say, he's back. He's back. And word got out, and they scurried about the surrounding countryside, in villages, towns, countryside, marketplace, bringing all the people. Now, how come he puts this summary right after walking on the water and so on? Not the thing. Huh?
He's moving on, he's turning the page.
He's turning the page, he's moving on. Let's see it in contrast to his disciples. His disciples, who have seen all the miracles before, who have seen the exorcisms before, who helped pass out the bread and the fish at the multiplication, and they still think they see a ghost, for crying out loud. But he goes back to the countryside, village, and one of the villages on the other side, and people come from all over. They have the insight into his true identity. He talked to them about it. Okay? They still think they see a ghost. But it's the other common people who have such a focus on faith that they feel if they go up to him and just touch. You know what that means, tassel of his cloak, don't you? Everyone? Who doesn't? Gary? The tassel of his cloak? You know what that means?
But you say they had faith. All they knew was this man healed the sick. Right. So they're coming to get healed. They have a healer here. So that's why when you say they had faith and the disciples or the apostles didn't, I'm confused.
Okay, so they had in many of the miracles before, either the person themselves who needed to be healed of something came because they heard about Jesus, or like the cripple on the mat, he was brought by other people, and they didn't bring him on the mat and open up the ceiling in the house unless they believed that this man could do something. It was, granted, it was a rudimentary faith, and a faith in maybe like a faith healer or so on, who was different than a magician, who would ask for money for what he was doing. The faith healers and magicians and charlatans at that time. Give me the money first, and then I'll do incantations and so on. But Jesus didn't do that. See, so it was a focus on healing. And these people came, and so much so, they figured all they have to do is touch the tassel of his prayer shawl, his cloak, okay? So, but his disciples who've been with them, and here's the point. The point is, disciples have been with him through all this, they still don't get it. Why don't they begin to see his true identity? Well, that's part of, in Mark particularly, the messianic secret. Maybe that's why in the other miracles that we saw, when Jesus healed people, even the Gerasene, the wild man, okay, he said, don't tell anybody, right? Don't tell anybody. But after multiplication of the fishes and loaves, he doesn't say that. He doesn't have to. So many people were fed. It spread through that whole region on the western side of the Sea of Galilee. And so they came. And notice, they didn't come looking for more bread, they came for healing, right? So it's Jesus that brings about healing and wholeness to the people. And maybe it's that sense that the common people, they wanted that feeling of wholeness. Maybe there was so much anticipation of a Messiah that they came not just to be healed, but also to be inspired. In Roman secular history and in Flavius Josephus, the Jewish turned Roman trader, historian from the 1st century, he tells of the beginning of a rebellion that happened in that same region against the Romans. And that 1,500 of the folks from that area got killed and slaughtered by the Romans. Okay, towards the end of the 1st century, or the midpoint of the 1st century, about the time that this. So that this was written. So there was a great deal of anticipation amongst the Jewish population, particularly on the west side of the Jordan River, along the Sea of Galilee, up in the hills. There was a great deal of anticipation of the Messiah coming, and the kind of Messiah that would overthrow the subjugation of the Romans. And so that's why maybe a lot of these people came out. They needed wholeness, they needed completeness, they needed not only physical healing, but healing in here. Okay? All right. So, the next section, chapter 7 is all about Jesus being confronted by the elders and the Pharisees, and they too, there's no miracles in here. So we're going to skip over most of 7, but in chapter 7, verse 24, it says, from that place he went off to the district of Tyre and Sidon. He entered the house and wanted no one to know about it, but he could not escape notice. So all of a sudden we have he and his disciples going from, and this isn't, Mark doesn't write necessarily according to a set itinerary. Okay? So they go from here, up here to Tyre and Sidon, coast of Lebanon, going to the Mediterranean Sea. Well, just before the multiplication of loaves and fishes, Jesus says to his disciples, let's go to a deserted place, right? And so it was still along the Sea of Galilee, and the crowds came out, and Jesus preached, and then felt sorry for them, and they had multiplication of loaves and fishes, right? So they still didn't get their vacation in.
How many miles from there to there, roughly?
How many miles from here to here?
Yeah.
Well, Tyre is here, and Sidon is up here. That's probably... Yeah, there is.
About 20 miles.
That's amazing. You're the only legend here.
20 to 25 to 30 miles. Okay? Which isn't far here, but there's a whole mountain range in between. The mountains of Lebanon. Okay? Hey, the Sea of Galilee. The Sea of Galilee is down in a bowl, I said. It's 600 feet below sea level. Okay? it's surrounded by high hills all around it that are almost at, still below sea level, but are 500, 600 feet above that, okay? And then to the west, particularly as you go towards the Mediterranean Sea, there's the whole mountain range of, with valleys in between, but of the Lebanese mountains. Today we call it Lebanese mountains, okay? So, but for him to go, he's taking the apostles on vacation to the Mediterranean Sea, the beach, I mean, there's beaches there. Probably in Jesus' day too. Trying to get away, because it didn't work around the Sea of Galilee, did it? Come away to a deserted place. Not a desert place, but so they go on a real big vacation, okay? But word gets out, in this Syrophoenician woman comes. Now this is one of the cutest little stories that you can find. There's not too often in the Gospel of Mark that you find Jesus relating to women. And here's a non-Jewish woman, a Gentile woman. Okay? So they're in this house. Soon a woman whose daughter had an unclean spirit heard about him. She came and fell at his feet. Now the woman was a Greek, a Syrophoenician by birth, and she begged him to drive the demon out of her daughter. And he said to her, let the children be fed first, for it is not right to take the food of the children and throw it to the dogs. Well, that was like, you know, like, that's Jesus saying to this woman. It's kind of sassy, huh? Huh? It's kind of rude, right? It doesn't stop the woman, though. What did she say? She said to him in reply, but Lord, even the dogs under the table eat the children's scraps. And he said to her, for saying this, you may go. The demon has gone out of your daughter already. And she went home and found the child lying in bed and the demon gone. So she got her wish and so on. Even though we had this little repartee, huh? Yes?
Yeah, I've got a big question mark when I read here, and I don't understand that whole statement,
What?
throwing it to the dogs and stuff. I don't understand that.
You don't understand the statement about throwing it to the dogs? Well, here's one interpretation. Okay, by commentaries who did research on this. They believe that at that time, it was the Jewish farmers that had the fertile plains and were growing the wheat that they brought down to the sea coast, Tyre and Sidon, to feed the Gentile population. And so, from that perspective, for him to say it's not right to take the food, the Jewish farmers would have fed their families and children first and sold off the other excess wheat to the Gentile Syrophoenician population along the city coast. So that commentary, or that repartee, makes a little more sense, huh? To Jesus saying, it's not right to take the food that we feed to the children and throw it to the dog. And from the Jewish population, anyone who wasn't a Jew, who was a Greek particularly, my goodness, they ate bacon. The Greeks. Ham, pork, dirty, unclean stuff. It's not right to do that. So that the Jews looked down upon the Greco-Romans as being unclean. All right? And yet they had socioeconomic connection and relationship with those Greek-speaking people. Joe?
The footnote in my Bible was Jesus repeatedly pointed out that the Messiah had come to bring the kingdom of God first to the children of Israel.
Yeah. So, and that's a nice, good. Another explanation. Okay. So in the footnote of the New American Bible, I forgot to look at that. In here. First of all, there's a footnote about his withdrawing to Tyre and Sidon. It says, the withdrawal of Jesus to the district of Tyre and Sidon may have been a respite, but he soon moved towards Sidon and by way of the Sea of Galilee to the Decapolis. These districts provided a Gentile setting for the extension of his ministry of healing because people were acknowledged his power. And actions attributed to Jesus were also used as other healers at that time. Now, footnote to this woman in interaction. The figure of a household in which children at table are fed first, and then their leftover food is given to the dogs under the table, is used effectively to acknowledge the prior claim of the Jews to the ministry of Jesus. However, Jesus accedes to the Gentile woman's plea for the cure of her afflicted daughter because of her faith. I'm going to point out something else too. Here's a little broader hermeneutical development for us. Okay, when people come and challenge something about our faith, sometimes while they're still speaking, we're preparing a defense in our mind. Right? We're preparing a defense in our mind. And particularly if they say something critical of our faith, of our Catholic Church, and so on, we're preparing, for that. And maybe something a little bit sassy or sarcastic, like Jesus responded to this woman, flippant, But when she responds, still focused on the need for healing for her daughter, Jesus recognizes that determined love that she has. This woman will do anything to see if her daughter can be cured, even by this Jewish man that has this reputation of being a healer. She won't stop at anything. Jesus recognizes. Yeah.
Next Friday.
Yeah. Jesus recognizes her faith. Jesus recognizes. And rather than saying anything further, sarcastic or so on, he doesn't say, oh, I give up. No, he said, your wish is granted. Basically, as you wish. What a great response wouldn't that be to someone who challenges, elements of faith, to just say to them, well, as you wish. Okay, as you wish. So, and then healing happens. And basically, the response continues or leaves the door open for his continued relationship with, if that woman represents the Syro-Phoenician Greek-speaking population of that area, which is outside of the area of Jesus' main ministry, his evangelical ministry, it leaves the door open for other Greek-speaking Gentile people to receive Jesus if they recognize him. Okay. So, all right. Time is up. I have to go for Mass, but just that you know, not next week, but the following week. I'll be here next week. But the following week, I'll be gone up in the deer camp. And we're going to have a special guest speaker. You've heard about here in Appleton, 3 different agencies that have come together now for the homeless, a homeless connection, the warming shelter, which our group has been a part of, and what's the third one? Housing partnership. So they've come together. They're called pillars now. And it happens that the man who's been appointed as the executive director of the Pillars will be here, Mr. Joe Lofton. We have kind of an in with them because his folks belong to the parish, so. So if you have any questions about that and the function of that and how maybe we can continue to help those who are homeless and in need shelter and so on, in 2 weeks, we'll have Mr. Joe Lofty, and I'll try to finish up the marvelous miracles in Mark next week. Thank you very much for coming, everyone. Oh, that's what I don't know.
Thank you, sir.
Oh, yeah.